Welcome back to Sigil Sanctum, where we pierce the veil between the seen and unseen, exploring the deepest mysteries of ancient texts, forgotten wisdom, and the cosmic forces that shape our reality. I'm your host, and today we embark on perhaps the most profound and controversial journey we've ever undertaken, the complete story of Lucifer, the morning star, whose fall from grace shook the very foundations of existence itself. Before we dive into these celestial depths, I want to connect with our incredible global community. Where in the world are you watching from today? Are you joining us from the bustling streets of New York, the ancient lands of Jerusalem, the mystical highlands of Scotland, or perhaps from somewhere I've never even imagined? Drop your location in the comments below. There's something truly magical about knowing that seekers of truth from every corner of our world are gathering here to explore these timeless mysteries together. Now, let's begin at the very beginning. Not the beginning of our world, but the beginning of everything. Before time itself was conceived, before the first photon of light pierced the cosmic darkness, before matter and energy danced their eternal waltz across the universe, there existed a realm of pure, undiluted divinity. This wasn't simply a place you could visit or a dimension you could measure. It was the very source and foundation of all existence, heaven. Picture, if you can, a reality where every thought was perfect truth, where every intention was pure love, where every action was flawless harmony. This was the celestial realm, existing in perfect unity with the Creator's will, a place where the very concept of discord, pain, or imperfection was not merely absent, it was literally inconceivable. Within this realm of absolute perfection, the Creator established a magnificent hierarchy of celestial beings. These weren't the chubby, harp-playing cherubs of popular imagination, but rather cosmic entities of unimaginable power and intelligence. The seraphim burned with holy fire, their 6 wings covering their faces in reverence as they cried, "Holy, holy, holy," throughout eternity. The cherubim, with their 4 faces representing all of creation, guarded the very throne of God. Opanium, described as wheels within wheels, covered with eyes, embodied the divine presence in motion. But among all these magnificent beings, one stood apart not merely in rank, but in the very essence of his being. His name was Lucifer, and that name itself holds keys to understanding his original nature. In Latin, Lucifer means light-bearer, or morning star, but the original Hebrew term halal carries even deeper significance. It refers to the brightest star in the morning sky, the herald of dawn, the one who announces the coming of light itself. Yet this translation history reveals something fascinating that most people never consider. The name Lucifer doesn't appear in the original Hebrew manuscripts at all. It was Saint Jerome, translating the Bible into Latin in the 4th century, who chose this particular word. Why is this significant? Because it suggests that even the Church Fathers recognized something uniquely luminous about this being, something that set him apart from every other created entity. According to Ezekiel 28:12-15, Lucifer was described as the seal of perfection, full of wisdom, and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone adorned you: carnelian, chrysolite, and emerald, topaz, onyx, and jasper, lapis lazuli, turquoise, and beryl. Your settings and mountings were made of gold. On the day you were created, they were prepared. This isn't mere poetic language, it's a description of a being whose very essence was crafted from the fundamental forces of creation itself. Each precious stone mentioned corresponds to different aspects of divine nature: carnelian representing life force, chrysolite symbolizing divine wisdom, emerald embodying eternal love, and so forth. Lucifer wasn't just decorated with these elements, he was composed of them, making him a living embodiment of divine attributes. But the description continues. You are anointed as a guardian cherub, for so I ordained you. You were on the holy mount of God. You walked among the fiery stones. This reveals Lucifer's unique position in the celestial hierarchy. He wasn't merely another angel among many, he was the anointed guardian, the one specifically chosen and positioned to walk in the very presence of God himself. Recent theological scholarship has proposed that Lucifer's role was equivalent to what we might call a cosmic prime minister or divine regent. He possessed executive authority over vast regions of creation, commanded legions of angels, and served as the primary intermediary between the divine throne and the rest of the celestial host. Ancient rabbinical texts suggest that he had authority over music and worship in heaven, that his voice could harmonize the very spheres, and that his presence brought order and beauty to all celestial gatherings. The fiery stones mentioned in Ezekiel's description have fascinated scholars for millennia. Some interpret these as the fundamental building blocks of divine reality, pure crystallized divine energy that formed the very foundation of God's throne room. To walk among these stones meant to exist at the absolute center of cosmic power and authority. Imagine the sheer magnitude of such a being. His intellect could comprehend the mathematical perfection underlying all creation. Every spiral galaxy, every quantum particle, every strand of DNA was as familiar to him as your own name is to you. His beauty surpassed anything our minds can conceive. If you've ever been moved to tears by a sunset, overwhelmed by the sight of mountain peaks, or stunned by the complexity of a single flower, Multiply that feeling by infinity, and you might begin to approach Lucifer's original magnificence. His power was equally staggering. While never equal to God's omnipotence, Lucifer possessed abilities that dwarfed anything we see in the natural world. He could speak galaxies into existence, orchestrate the movements of celestial bodies, and command the fundamental forces of physics with a mere thought. Time and space bent to his will, and the laws of nature were merely suggestions in his presence. But perhaps most remarkably, Lucifer possessed perfect wisdom, at least initially. He understood the intricate relationships between all things, the perfect justice of divine law, the absolute necessity of divine order, and the infinite love that motivated every aspect of creation. He wasn't ignorant of God's nature or confused about divine intentions. He knew, with perfect clarity, exactly who God was and why the universe operated according to divine principles. This perfect knowledge extended to prophecy as well. Many scholars believe that Lucifer was aware of God's future plans for creation, including the eventual creation of humanity and the incarnation of the divine Son. Some suggest that this foreknowledge played a crucial role in what was to come, that Lucifer's rebellion wasn't just about personal pride, but about a fundamental disagreement with God's plan for the cosmos. The ancient text known as the Life of Adam and Eve, while not canonical, provides additional insight into Lucifer's original nature. It describes him as the greatest of all God's creatures, possessed of wisdom that surpassed even the other archangels, and beauty that made him the crown jewel of all creation. His light was said to be so brilliant that when he stood before God's throne, the entire heavenly host would shield their eyes in reverence not to God alone, but to the magnificent being who served as his closest servant. Yet even in this description of perfection, we find hints of what was to come. The text of Ezekiel 28-15 contains a crucial phrase: "You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created, till iniquity was found in you." This single sentence contains one of the greatest mysteries in all of Scripture. How could perfect wisdom and perfect beauty give birth to perfect evil? How could a being with complete understanding of divine goodness choose its opposite? This question has puzzled theologians for millennia, and the answer lies not in Lucifer's limitations, but in the very gift that made him most like his creator, free will. God, in his infinite wisdom, created beings capable of genuine love, genuine worship, and genuine relationship, but love cannot exist without choice. Worship means nothing without the possibility of rebellion, and relationship requires the freedom to accept or reject. Lucifer possessed this freedom in its fullest form. Unlike humans, who are limited by finite understanding and emotional weakness, Lucifer made his choice with perfect knowledge and complete clarity. This makes his subsequent rebellion not a tragedy of ignorance, but the most calculated decision in the history of existence. As we stand on the threshold of understanding this cosmic catastrophe, remember that we're not merely discussing ancient mythology or religious allegory. We're exploring the fundamental nature of good and evil, the origin of moral choice, and the cosmic context within which every human decision takes place. The story of Lucifer's perfection and fall illuminates not just ancient history, but the spiritual battlefield in which we all find ourselves today. Now, if you're finding this deep exploration of cosmic mysteries as fascinating as I am, this is the perfect moment to become part of our growing community of truth seekers. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what we're about to uncover next will challenge everything. You thought you knew about the nature of evil itself? Trust me, you won't want to miss where this journey takes us. The transformation from perfect servant to cosmic rebel didn't happen in a single moment. It was a process. A gradual corruption that began with something so subtle it might have gone unnoticed by casual observers. Pride, not the obvious, boastful pride we recognize in humans, but something far more insidious, the pride of perfection itself. To understand this, we must first grasp the unique position Lucifer held in creation. Imagine being the most beautiful, most intelligent, most powerful being ever created. Every other angel looked up to you with awe. Your understanding surpassed that of countless millions of celestial beings. Your authority extended across vast, cosmic territories. Your very presence brought order and harmony wherever you went. Now, here's the crucial question. When you possess such overwhelming superiority, such magnificent perfection, how do you maintain humility? How do you remember that all your gifts come from another, that your existence itself depends entirely on a power greater than your own? For eons beyond counting, Lucifer managed this perfect balance. He wielded incredible power while remaining perfectly submitted to divine authority. He commanded legions while never forgetting his place as a servant. He shone with magnificent light while always reflecting the greater glory of his Creator. But something began to shift. Isaiah 14:13-14 records what many believe to be Lucifer's own thoughts during this period. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation, on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Notice the repetition of I will in this passage. 5 times, Lucifer declares, his intention to elevate himself. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, it was a calculated, deliberate decision to overthrow the cosmic order itself. But what triggered this monumental shift from perfect servant to cosmic rebel? Recent theological scholarship has proposed several fascinating theories, each supported by careful analysis of ancient texts and traditions. The first theory centers on the concept of divine foreknowledge. Many scholars believe that Lucifer, in his role as the highest of all created beings, was granted unique insight into God's future plans for creation. This included knowledge of humanity's creation, the incarnation of God's Son, and perhaps most challenging of all, the elevation of redeemed humans to positions of authority in the coming kingdom. Imagine Lucifer's reaction upon learning that these future humans, beings lower than angels in the cosmic hierarchy, would someday be exalted above even the highest angelic ranks. The Apostle Paul hints at this in 1 Corinthians 3, where he writes, "Do you not know that we shall judge angels?" For a being whose entire identity was built on his supremacy over all creation, this revelation might have been the catalyst for rebellion. The second theory, supported by ancient Jewish traditions and some early Christian writers, suggests that Lucifer's rebellion was triggered by the divine command to worship the pre-incarnate Christ. According to this interpretation, when God revealed his plan for the Son to take on human nature, he commanded all the angels to worship this God-man. Lucifer, in his pride, refused to bow down to what he perceived as an inferior form divinity, constrained by human limitations. This theory finds support in Hebrews 1-6, which states, "And again, when he brings the firstborn into the world, he says, 'Let all the angels of God worship him.'" The refusal to worship Christ would represent not just personal pride, but a fundamental rejection of God's redemptive plan for creation. A third theory, perhaps the most psychologically complex, suggests that Lucifer's rebellion stemmed from his very perfection. Having never experienced failure, limitation, or dependence, he gradually lost the ability to conceive of any authority greater than his own. His perfection became a prison of solipsism, the belief that only his own mind was sure to exist. This interpretation gains weight when we consider the nature of perfect beings. Humans, in our limitation and weakness, naturally understand our dependence on others. We experience hunger, so we appreciate those who feed us. We feel pain, so we value healers. We face death, so we cherish life. But a perfect being experiences none of these dependencies. Lucifer never hungered, never hurt, never faced genuine threat or limitation. In such a state, gratitude and humility become abstract concepts rather than lived experiences. Ancient Mesopotamian texts provide additional context for understanding Lucifer's rebellion. The Babylonian creation myth, the Enuma Elish, describes a cosmic war between order and chaos, with divine beings fighting for supremacy over creation itself. While these myths aren't identical to the biblical account, they suggest that the concept of rebellion within the divine realm was widely understood in ancient cultures. The Persian religious text known as the Banished describes Arin, the destructive spirit, as originally being an equal to Ahura Mazda, the creator deity. When Ahriman saw the light of Ahura Mazda, he became jealous and sought to destroy it. This parallel suggests that the theme of divine rebellion born from jealousy was a recurring motif in ancient religious thought. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Lucifer's rebellion is that it wasn't born from ignorance or misunderstanding. Unlike human sin, which often stems from limited knowledge or emotional weakness, Lucifer's choice was made with perfect understanding of its consequences. He knew exactly what he was choosing and exactly what he was rejecting. The Book of Enoch, while not canonical, provides fascinating details about this period. It describes how Lucifer began to question the divine arrangements, not openly at first, but through subtle suggestions planted in the minds of other angels. "Why," he would whisper, "should beings of such power and wisdom be subject to another? Are we not also children of light? Do we not also possess divine attributes?" These weren't questions born from genuine curiosity, but calculated men designed to erode the natural order of heaven. Lucifer understood that direct confrontation would be futile. God's power was absolute. Instead, he chose the path of subversion, gradually corrupting the perfect harmony of heaven with seeds of doubt and discontent. The process was slow and methodical. Lucifer began by sharing his doubts with those angels closest to him, beings who looked up to him with natural reverence. He presented his rebellion not as selfish ambition, but as liberation, freedom from arbitrary authority, the right of intelligent beings to govern themselves, the elimination of hierarchical structures that, he argued, limited their true potential. This approach proved devastatingly effective. According to Revelation 12:2-4, his tail drew a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. If we interpret stars as angels, this means Lucifer successfully convinced approximately 100 billion celestial beings to join his rebellion. This wasn't a small insurrection, it was a cosmic civil war that split the very foundations of creation. What's particularly chilling about this account is how modern it sounds. Lucifer's arguments echo the same philosophical positions we hear today: the rejection of absolute authority, the elevation of individual autonomy above communal harmony, the belief that intelligence and power grant the right to self-determination, regardless of consequences. The tragic irony is that Lucifer's rebellion against limiting divine authority ultimately led to his own complete limitation. In seeking absolute freedom, he chose absolute bondage. In rejecting the source of all goodness, he became the embodiment of evil. In attempting to become like God, he became God's opposite. As the seeds of rebellion took root and grew, heaven itself began to tremble. The perfect harmony that had existed since creation's dawn was shattered by discord. The beautiful music of the spheres became discordant. The light that had filled all of heaven began to dim, as its greatest bearer prepared to extinguish himself in the darkness of his own pride. The stage was set for the greatest conflict in the history of existence, a war that would determine not just the fate of the rebels, but the very nature of good and evil for all eternity. What happened next defies human comprehension. The realm of perfect peace, where violence was not merely absent, but inconceivable, became the stage for the most catastrophic conflict in the history of existence. This wasn't war as we understand it, with physical weapons, geographical battlefields, and mortal casualties. This was warfare at the level of pure spirit, pure will, pure cosmic authority itself. Revelation 1:2-7-8 provides our primary biblical account, and war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. But this brief description barely scratches the surface of what must have been a conflict of unimaginable scope and intensity. To understand the magnitude of this war, we must first grasp what was at stake. This wasn't a territorial dispute or political rebellion. It was an attempt to overthrow the fundamental order of existence itself. Lucifer wasn't simply seeking a larger role in heaven's government. He was attempting to replace God as the ultimate authority over all creation. The forces were staggeringly unequal, yet terrifyingly matched in certain ways. On one side stood Lucifer, the most powerful created being in existence, commanding approximately 1/3 of all angelic hosts. Ancient rabbinical calculations suggest this could represent as many as 100 billion individual angels, each possessing supernatural power far beyond human comprehension. These weren't ordinary soldiers, but cosmic beings of immense intelligence and capability. Each fallen angel had once held positions of significant authority in heaven's hierarchy. They commanded stellar formations, governed cosmic forces, and possessed intimate knowledge of divine operations. Their combined power could reshape galaxies, manipulate the fundamental forces of physics, and alter the very fabric of space-time itself. Leading this cosmic rebellion was Lucifer himself, whose power was exceeded only by God's own omnipotence. His beauty had become terrible, his wisdom had become cunning, his light had become destructive fire. Yet he retained all his original abilities: the capacity to command natural forces, to influence lesser beings, to comprehend and manipulate complex cosmic systems. But opposing this seemingly overwhelming force stood something even more formidable: the will of God, manifested through the archangel Michael and the loyal angels. Michael, whose name means "who is like God," became the primary instrument of divine justice in this cosmic conflict. Here we encounter one of the most fascinating aspects of this war: its theological implications. God himself did not directly engage in battle with Lucifer. This wasn't because he lacked the power to do so, but because such direct intervention would have instantly annihilated not just the rebels, but potentially the very fabric of creation itself. Instead, God chose to work through Michael, demonstrating that even in cosmic warfare, he operated through established order and delegated authority. Michael's role in this conflict reveals something profound about the nature of divine justice. Unlike Lucifer, who fought for personal exaltation, Michael fought not for his own glory, but as an instrument of divine will. He possessed no personal ambition to rulership, no desire for elevation above his station. His entire motivation was the preservation of cosmic order and the vindication of divine authority. The nature of this warfare challenges our understanding of conflict itself. Ancient texts describe it not as a series of battles with clear beginnings and endings, but as a cosmic struggle that permeated every level of existence simultaneously. The war was fought in the realm of pure ideas, where thoughts had the power to reshape reality. It was waged in the dimension of spiritual authority, where the very right to command obedience was contested. It raged in the sphere of cosmic law, where the fundamental principles governing existence were challenged and defended. Some theological traditions suggest that this war took place outside of time as we understand it, meaning it could have lasted for eons from one perspective while occurring instantaneously from another. The battlefield wasn't a physical location, but the very structure of spiritual reality itself. The Book of Enoch provides additional details about this conflict, describing how the war began with debates and arguments, escalated into open confrontation, and finally erupted into full cosmic warfare. According to this text, Lucifer's first act of rebellion was to refuse to worship God during a great heavenly assembly. When commanded to bow down along with all the other angels, he remained standing, declaring his independence from divine authority. This act of defiance sent shockwaves through the heavenly realm. For the first time in the history of creation, a being had openly refused a direct divine command. The implications were staggering. If one being could successfully defy God's authority, the entire structure of cosmic order could collapse. Michael's response was immediate and decisive. According to ancient traditions, he stepped forward and declared, "Who is like God?" Both a rhetorical question, asserting God's unique supremacy, and a battle cry rallying all loyal angels to defend divine authority. This moment marked the transition from theological debate to actual warfare. The conflict that followed was unlike anything that had ever occurred or would ever occur again. Imagine cosmic forces clashing with such intensity that the very foundations of heaven trembled. Stars were extinguished and reignited. The harmonious music of the spheres became a cacophony of cosmic discord. The perfect light of heaven was fractured into a spectrum of conflicting energies. Each battle in this war was fought simultaneously on multiple levels. On the intellectual level, it was a contest between Lucifer's sophisticated arguments for angelic independence and Michael's unwavering defense of divine supremacy. On the emotional level, it was a struggle between the appeal of prideful self-determination and the call of humble service. On the spiritual level, it was the ultimate test of whether created beings could successfully oppose their creator. The weapons used in this warfare were not physical, but they were devastatingly real. Lucifer wielded the power of persuasion, using his superior intellect to craft arguments that could shake the faith of even loyal angels. He employed his magnificent beauty to inspire followers, his vast knowledge to justify rebellion, and his tremendous power to demonstrate the feasibility of independence from divine authority. Michael and the loyal angels fought with weapons of their own, unwavering faith in divine goodness, perfect obedience to cosmic order, and absolute trust in God's ultimate wisdom. Their power came not from personal ability but from perfect alignment with divine will, making them conduits for infinite power rather than limited by their individual capacities. As the war raged, its effects began to manifest throughout creation. The perfect harmony that had characterized existence since the beginning was shattered. Chaos previously unknown in God's creation began to assert itself. The very concept of opposition to divine will, once inconceivable, became a terrible reality. Ancient texts describe how the war affected not just the combatants, but the entire structure of heaven itself. Regions that had known only peace became battlefields. Angels who had existed in perfect unity found themselves divided by fundamental disagreements about the nature of existence itself. The cosmic order that had seemed eternal and unchangeable revealed itself to be vulnerable to challenge and disruption. Yet even as the war raged with unprecedented fury, its outcome was never truly in doubt. Despite commanding 1/3 of all angels, despite possessing unimaginable power and intelligence, despite fighting with the desperation of those who had staked everything on victory, Lucifer's forces could not prevail against the infinite authority of their creator. The reason for their defeat goes beyond mere differences in power levels. Lucifer's rebellion was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of existence itself. He believed that power gave him the right to rule, that intelligence justified independence, that perfection earned equality with God. But these beliefs, however logical they might seem, were built on a false foundation. The truth that Lucifer refused to accept was that all power, all intelligence, all perfection, ultimately derives from God as its source. A created being, no matter how magnificent, cannot successfully oppose the very source of its existence. To rebel against God is, ultimately, to rebel against the foundation of one's own being, a self-defeating proposition that inevitably leads to self-destruction. As the war reached its climax, this fundamental truth became undeniably apparent. Lucifer's forces, despite their initial advantages, began to weaken as they cut themselves off from the very source of their power. Their light grew dim, their strength faltered, their unity fractured under the weight of their impossible position. Michael and the loyal angels, meanwhile, grew stronger as the conflict progressed, drawing unlimited power from their perfect alignment with divine will. They were not fighting for personal victory, but for the vindication of cosmic truth. Not for individual glory, but for the preservation of universal order. The war's conclusion was as decisive as it was inevitable, but its consequences would echo throughout all of creation for eternity. The very existence of the conflict had introduced concepts previously unknown to creation: rebellion, disorder, evil itself. Heaven had been purged of corruption, but the seeds of that corruption had been scattered throughout the cosmos, taking root in dimensions and realms that would feel their effects for ages to come. The defeat wasn't merely military, it was a complete transformation of the very essence of what Lucifer was. When Jesus declared in Luke 10:18, "I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven," he was describing more than a change of location. This was a fundamental alteration of existence itself, a metamorphosis so complete that the being who fell was no longer recognizable as the one who had rebelled. To understand the magnitude of this transformation, we must first grasp what falling from heaven actually meant. This wasn't simply eviction from a physical location, but exile from the very source of existence, light, truth, and goodness. Heaven isn't merely God's dwelling place, it's the fundamental reality from which all other existence derives its meaning, purpose, and continued being. When Lucifer was cast out of heaven, he was severed from this foundational reality. The light that had once emanated from his very being, light, that was his essence, not merely his appearance, began to dim and ultimately transformed into its opposite. The morning star, whose brilliance had announced the coming of divine light, became associated with darkness, deception, and spiritual blindness. This transformation was both instantaneous and gradual, a paradox that reflects the complex nature of spiritual reality. In one sense, the change was immediate. The moment of rebellion marked an irreversible crossing of a cosmic line, a fundamental choice that could never be undone. Yet in another sense, the full implications of that choice continued to unfold, as Lucifer discovered the true meaning of separation from divine goodness. The being who emerged from this cosmic catastrophe bore little resemblance to the magnificent creature who had once walked among the fiery stones. His name itself changed from Lucifer the Light-Bearer to Satan, meaning the adversary or the accuser in Hebrew. This wasn't merely a change of title but a complete redefinition of identity and purpose. Where once stood the most beautiful creature in all creation, there now existed something that embodied the very opposite of divine beauty. Ancient descriptions of Satan's appearance vary widely, but they consistently emphasize his transformation from sublime beauty to terrible horror. Some texts describe him as maintaining vestiges of his former magnificence, but twisted and corrupted beauty turned malevolent, power become destructive, wisdom transformed into cunning. Other traditions present his transformation as even more radical. The being of pure light became associated with darkness so complete that it seemed to actively absorb illumination. His voice, once capable of harmonizing the music of the spheres, became the source of discord and confusion. His presence, which had once brought order and peace, now carried chaos and destruction wherever it went. But perhaps the most significant aspect of Lucifer's transformation was the change in his fundamental nature and purpose. As the morning star, his entire existence had been oriented towards serving God, serving the cosmic order, serving the good of all creation. Every thought, every action, every use of his magnificent abilities had been directed toward constructive, life-affirming purposes. As Satan, this orientation was completely reversed. His entire existence became focused on opposition, opposing God, opposing divine order, opposing the good of creation. Yet here we encounter one of the most profound ironies in all of theological thought. In becoming God's adversary, Satan became utterly dependent on God for his very identity and purpose. This dependency reveals a crucial truth about the nature of evil itself. Evil is not a creative force. It cannot bring anything genuinely new into existence. Instead, it is essentially parasitic, existing only by corrupting, twisting, or destroying what is good. Satan's power, formidable as it remains, is entirely reactive. He can tempt, deceive, corrupt, and destroy, but he cannot create, heal, restore, or genuinely improve anything. The transformation also affected Satan's relationship with knowledge and truth. As Lucifer, he had possessed perfect wisdom, understanding of divine nature, cosmic law, and the relationships between all things. This wisdom was rooted in his connection to the source of all truth. When severed from that source, his knowledge remained vast but became fundamentally corrupted. Satan retained his intellectual capabilities, his understanding of cosmic systems, his awareness of divine plans and purposes, but this knowledge, no longer illuminated by divine truth, became a tool for deception rather than enlightenment. He became, in the words of Jesus, the father of lies, John 8:44, not because he was ignorant of the truth, but because he deliberately twisted truth into falsehood. This corruption of wisdom is perhaps more dangerous than simple ignorance. An ignorant being can be taught. A being who understands truth but deliberately perverts it becomes a source of sophisticated deception. Satan's arguments are compelling precisely because they contain elements of truth, skillfully woven together, with lies to create conclusions that sound reasonable but lead to destruction. The transformation of Lucifer's followers, the angels who had joined his rebellion, paralleled his own metamorphosis. These beings, who had once served various constructive functions in the cosmic order, became what we know as demons or fallen angels. Like their leader, they retained their supernatural abilities but lost their connection to the source of goodness and truth. Each fallen angel became a specialist in particular forms of corruption, their original gifts and responsibilities twisted into instruments of destruction. Angels who had once governed natural forces became agents of natural disasters. Those who had overseen human affairs became tempters and deceivers. Beings who had facilitated communication between heaven and earth became sources of false prophecy and spiritual confusion. The ancient text, known as the Testament of Solomon, provides detailed descriptions of how various demons describe their own transformations and current activities. While not canonical, these accounts offer insight into how early Jewish and Christian thinkers understood the fate of the fallen angels. Each demon interviewed claims to have once served constructive purposes before their fall, corrupted their nature, and inverted their functions. Yet even in their fallen state, both Satan and his followers remained bound by certain limitations. Their power, while formidable, was not infinite. They remained created beings, subject to divine authority even in their rebellion. God's sovereignty over them was demonstrated by their inability to act beyond the boundaries he established. As seen in the book of Job, where Satan must request permission to test Job. This limitation reveals another crucial aspect of Satan's transformation. His power became both real and illusory simultaneously. Real, in that he retained significant supernatural abilities that far exceeded human capacity. Illusory, in that his apparent independence from divine authority was always conditional and temporary. The psychological impact of this transformation may have been the most devastating aspect of all. Lucifer had existed for eons as the pinnacle of created perfection, basking in divine approval and cosmic admiration, to suddenly find himself cut off from the source of all goodness, to discover that his rebellion had led not to elevation but to degradation, to realize that his quest for independence had resulted in a more complete form of bondage. This psychological reversal must have been catastrophic. Some theologians suggest that this shock of transformation helps explain Satan's subsequent behavior. His relentless opposition to God and his creation might stem not just from pride and hatred, but from a kind of cosmic trauma, the psychological inability to accept the reality of his condition and the impossibility of returning to his former state. The irreversible nature of Satan's transformation is crucial too, understanding both his character and his ultimate fate. Unlike humans, who retain the possibility of redemption even after the most serious sins, Satan's rebellion was made with perfect knowledge and complete understanding of its consequences. There was no ignorance to excuse his choice, no external pressure to mitigate his responsibility, no limitation of understanding to allow for later repentance. This completeness of responsibility makes his transformation equally complete and permanent. The light-bearer cannot become the light-bearer again because the very capacity for alignment with divine goodness has been voluntarily and irrevocably surrendered. Satan's nature has become fixed in opposition to God, not because God refuses to forgive, but because Satan has made forgiveness impossible by the very completeness of his rebellion. As we witness this cosmic tragedy, the transformation of the most magnificent created being into the embodiment of evil itself, we're confronted with profound questions about the nature of choice, responsibility, and the ultimate consequences of our decisions. The fall of Lucifer stands as the ultimate cautionary tale, demonstrating that no amount of power, beauty, or intelligence can protect us from the devastating consequences of pride and rebellion against our Creator. Yet even in this darkest chapter of cosmic history, divine sovereignty and justice remain evident. Satan's transformation, terrible as it was, did not catch God by surprise or derail his ultimate plans for creation. Instead, even this supreme act of rebellion would ultimately serve divine purposes in ways that Satan himself could never have. Imagine with his transformation complete and his fate sealed. Satan faced a terrible reality. He had lost everything he had sought to gain, and there was no possibility of redemption or return. Yet rather than accepting defeat, he chose to continue his rebellion through a campaign of vengeance that would target the one thing he understood could truly wound his Creator, the objects of God's special love and attention. The book of Genesis doesn't immediately identify the serpent in the Garden of Eden as Satan, referring to it simply as more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. Genesis Straeus. However, Revelation 12-9 explicitly connects the dots. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. This identification transforms our understanding of the temptation of Eve, from a random encounter with a clever animal into the opening move of a cosmic chess game. But why did Satan choose the form of a serpent for this crucial mission? The answer reveals the sophisticated psychological warfare that would become Satan's primary weapon against humanity. In ancient Near Eastern cultures, serpents were symbols of wisdom, divine knowledge, and cosmic power. The serpent wasn't seen as an evil creature but as a mysterious being connected to hidden wisdom and secret knowledge. Archaeological evidence from Mesopotamian cultures shows serpents associated with healing, wisdom, and even divinity itself. By choosing this form, Satan appropriated symbols of wisdom and divine connection, making his deception more credible and appealing. Moreover, the serpent was the perfect disguise for a being whose true nature would have been immediately recognized and rejected. If Satan had appeared in his fallen state, terrible dark, obviously evil Adam and Eve would have fled in terror. If he had appeared in his original glory as Lucifer, they might have been overwhelmed and worshipped him instead of listening to his words. But as a serpent, he presented himself as a creature of the garden, wise but not threatening, knowledgeable but not overpowering. The timing of Satan's approach was equally calculated. Genesis suggests that he approached Eve when she was alone, separated from Adam's immediate presence. This wasn't coincidence but strategy. Satan understood that isolation makes individuals more vulnerable to deception, that the voice of temptation grows stronger when the voices of wisdom and accountability are absent. His opening words to Eve reveal a masterpiece of psychological manipulation. Has God indeed said, "You shall not eat of every tree of the garden"? Genesis 3. Notice the subtle but devastating technique employed here. Satan didn't begin with an outright denial of God's command or a direct challenge to divine authority. Instead, he planted a seed of doubt through a carefully crafted question. The question itself was technically inaccurate. God had said they could eat from every tree except one, but Satan's distortion was so subtle that it forced Eve to engage with his premise. By asking, "Has God indeed said?" he introduced the possibility that God's words might be unclear, uncertain, or even unreliable. This single question introduced doubt into a relationship that had previously been characterized by perfect trust and clear communication. Eve's response revealed that she had been caught in Satan's trap. She corrected his misstatement, but in doing so, she engaged with his underlying assumption that God's commands were open to interpretation and debate. She even added to God's actual words, saying, "Nor shall you touch it," Genesis 3:2-3, when God had only forbidden eating from the tree. This addition suggests that doubt had already begun to work in her mind, leading her to question not just what God had said, but what he had meant. Satan's next move was decisive. "You will not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Genesis 3:4-5. Here we see the full revelation of Satan's strategy. Having introduced doubt about God's words, he now directly contradicted them, claiming that God was not truthful but deceptive, not protective but restrictive, not loving but jealous. The lie was multilayered and sophisticated. First, Satan claimed that disobedience would not result in death, directly contradicting God's clear warning. Second, he suggested that God's prohibition was motivated not by love and protection, but by selfishness and fear that God was trying to prevent Adam and Eve from achieving their full potential. Third, he promised that disobedience would actually result in elevation, making them like God. This last promise was perhaps the most diabolical aspect of the entire temptation. Satan was essentially offering Adam and Eve the same thing he had sought for himself: equality with God, independence from divine authority, the right to determine good and evil for themselves. He was recruiting them into his own rebellion, making them partners in his cosmic insurrection. The tragic irony is that Satan's promise contained a grain of truth, which made it all the more deceptive. Eating from the tree would indeed give Adam and Eve knowledge of good and evil, but not in the way they expected. They would learn about evil not by understanding it from a safe distance, but by experiencing it directly, becoming corrupted by it, losing their innocence and their perfect relationship with their Creator. When Eve saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, Genesis 3:6, we witness the same threefold temptation that would later be described by the Apostle John as characterizing all worldly temptation: the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. 1 John 2:16. Satan had successfully awakened desires that had never existed in the perfect environment of Eden: physical appetite divorced from genuine need, aesthetic attraction divorced from divine purpose, and intellectual pride divorced from humble submission. 2. Divine wisdom. The consequences of Adam and Eve's disobedience were immediate and devastating, fulfilling Satan's ultimate goal of severing humanity's perfect relationship with God. The first humans experienced shame, fear, and alienation that had been unknown in their previous state of innocence. They hid from God's presence, blamed each other, and even blamed God himself for their situation, and ultimately faced exile from the perfect world they had inhabited. But Satan's victory was more complex than it initially appeared. While he had successfully corrupted humanity and introduced sin into the world, he had also, unknowingly, set in motion the very plan that would ultimately lead to his own defeat. God's response to the fall included the first prophetic promise of redemption: "And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." Genesis 3:15. This promise, known to theologians as the Proto-Evangelium, or First Gospel, declared that despite Satan's apparent victory, his ultimate defeat was already certain. Seed of the woman would one day crush the serpent's head, dealing him a fatal blow while receiving only a temporary wound in return. Satan had won a battle, but in doing so he had guaranteed his eventual loss of the war. Following his success in Eden, Satan's campaign against humanity expanded and intensified. Throughout the Old Testament, we see his fingerprints on major disasters and corruptions that plagued human history. The wickedness that led to the global flood, the pride that motivated the Tower of Babel, the corruption of entire nations, the persecution of God's chosen people all bore the hallmarks of Satan's influence and manipulation. His methods remained consistent with those he had employed in Eden: deception rather than force, corruption rather than destruction, the perversion of good things rather than the introduction of obviously evil ones. He understood that humans were more likely to be led astray by appealing temptations than by terrifying threats, more vulnerable to subtle lies than to obvious falsehoods. The Book of Job provides perhaps the clearest insight into Satan's ongoing activities and limitations during this period. Here we see him appearing before God as part of a heavenly council, suggesting that despite his rebellion and expulsion from heaven, he retained certain access rights and was still subject to divine authority. His request for permission to test Job reveals both his malicious intent and his fundamental powerlessness to act beyond the boundaries God established. Satan's accusation against Job: does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him? Job 1:9-10 reveals his cynical understanding of human nature. He believed that all human devotion to God was ultimately selfish, motivated by the benefits received rather than genuine love and loyalty. By attacking Job's prosperity, health, and family, Satan sought to prove that human faith was merely a transaction, that worship was simply a form of cosmic bribery. The outcome of Job's testing proved Satan wrong on every count, demonstrating that genuine faith could indeed endure even the most severe trials. Job's declaration, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him," Job 13:15, represented a complete refutation of Satan's cynical view of human nature and divine human relationships. As human history progressed, Satan's influence became increasingly sophisticated and systematic. Rather than relying solely on individual temptations, he began to work through entire cultures, political systems, and religious institutions. The rise and fall of empires, the corruption of religious practices, the development of philosophical systems that denied divine authority, all reflected Satan's ongoing campaign to separate humanity from their creator. Ancient Mesopotamian texts describe demonic influences on human affairs. While Egyptian records speak of spiritual forces that worked to corrupt human hearts and minds, Greek philosophy, despite its intellectual achievements, often led to conclusions that elevated human reason above divine revelation. Roman power, for all its administrative efficiency, became a tool for the persecution of those who remained faithful to God. Yet throughout this long campaign of corruption and deception, Satan's ultimate defeat remained certain. Every apparent victory contained the seeds of eventual failure. Every success in corrupting human hearts only highlighted the need for divine intervention. Every demonstration of his power only served to magnify the greater power of the one who would ultimately redeem humanity from his influence. The stage was being set for the final confrontation, the ultimate battle between good and evil, light and darkness, truth and deception. Satan's long campaign against humanity was approaching its climax, but so was God's plan for redemption. The seed of the woman promised in Eden was preparing to make his appearance, and with him would come the beginning of the end for the prince of darkness. As we approach our conclusion of this cosmic drama, we must confront the ultimate question that haunts every discussion of evil and redemption. What is Satan's final destiny, and what can we learn from his catastrophic fall? The answer to this question illuminates not only the fate of the adversary, but also the fundamental nature of divine justice, human choice, and the ultimate triumph of good over evil. The biblical prophecies concerning Satan's ultimate fate are both detailed and decisive. Revelation 22:7-10 provides the clearest picture of his final destiny. Now when the 1,000 years have expired, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, whose number is as the sand of the sea. They went up on the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. And fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. The devil, who deceived them, was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone where the beast and the false prophet are, and he will be tormented day and night forever and ever. This passage reveals several crucial aspects of Satan's ultimate destiny. First, it demonstrates that even at the very end of history, his fundamental nature remains unchanged. Given one final opportunity for rebellion, he immediately resumes his age-old campaign of deception and opposition to divine authority. There is no redemption, no repentance, no recognition of the futility of his position, only continued rebellion, until the very end. Second, it shows that his final defeat is both absolute and permanent. The lake of fire and brimstone represents not temporary punishment, but eternal separation from all that is good, true, and beautiful. This isn't divine vindictiveness, but the logical conclusion of choices made with perfect knowledge and complete freedom. Satan's destiny is not imposed upon him against his will. It is the inevitable result of decisions he made and continues to make. But why is Satan's punishment eternal? This question has troubled many who struggle to reconcile the concept of infinite punishment with divine love and mercy. The answer lies in understanding the nature of Satan's sin and the impossibility of genuine repentance given his character and knowledge. Unlike human beings, who sin through limitation, weakness, or ignorance, Satan's rebellion was committed with perfect understanding of its consequences. He knew exactly what he was choosing and exactly what he was rejecting. His sin was not a mistake that could be corrected or a weakness that could be overcome. It was a fundamental choice about the nature of existence itself. Moreover, Satan's continued behavior throughout history demonstrates that his character has become fixed in opposition to good. Even when faced with overwhelming evidence of God's power and goodness, even when experiencing the consequences of his rebellion, even when offered opportunities to cease his opposition, he continues to choose evil. His nature has become so thoroughly corrupted that repentance is not merely unlikely, it is impossible. This impossibility of repentance is not due to any limitation on divine forgiveness, but to the complete closure of Satan's heart to any influence that might lead to change. He has become what theologians call confirmed in evil. His choices have created a character so thoroughly opposed to good that he is literally incapable of desiring anything else. The eternal nature of his punishment also serves a cosmic purpose. In vindicating divine justice, throughout history, Satan has caused immeasurable suffering, corruption, and destruction. The pain he has inflicted on innocent beings, the lies he has spread, the rebellions he has instigated, the deaths he has caused all demand justice. Eternal punishment represents not excessive retribution but proportionate response to infinite crime against infinite goodness. Yet even Satan's ultimate defeat serves divine purposes beyond simple justice. His eternal punishment becomes a perpetual testimony to the consequences of rebellion against God, a constant reminder throughout eternity of what happens when created beings choose evil over good, pride over humility, self-will over divine authority. This brings us to the profound lessons that Satan's story offers to humanity. These lessons are not merely historical curiosities or theological abstractions, they are practical wisdom for navigating the spiritual challenges we face every day. The first and most obvious lesson is the devastating consequences of pride. Satan's fall demonstrates that no amount of beauty, intelligence, or power can protect us from the destructive effects of arrogance and self-exaltation. Pride doesn't just lead to individual failure, it corrupts everything it touches, turning gifts into curses, strengths into weaknesses, and blessings into sources of destruction. In our contemporary world, this lesson remains urgently relevant. We live in a culture that celebrates self-promotion, that equates confidence with competence, that encourages individuals to believe in themselves above all else. While healthy self-respect is important, Satan's example shows us where unbridled pride ultimately leads. The line between proper self-regard and destructive arrogance is thinner than we often realize, and crossing it can have consequences far beyond what we imagine. The second lesson concerns the nature of free will and moral responsibility. Satan's story demonstrates that freedom includes the freedom to make catastrophically wrong choices, and that the most intelligent beings can still choose evil. This has profound implications for how we understand human responsibility and divine justice. We cannot excuse our wrong choices by claiming ignorance, weakness, or external pressure. Though these factors may mitigate our responsibility, they do not eliminate it. Satan's example shows that even perfect knowledge and unlimited power do not automatically lead to right choices. Ultimately, our moral character is determined not by our circumstances, but by our choices, not by what happens to us, but by how we respond to what happens to us. The third lesson addresses the cosmic significance of our daily choices. Satan's rebellion began not with a dramatic act of defiance, but with subtle shifts in attitude, small compromises in thinking, gradual movements away from perfect submission to divine will. His example warns us that moral corruption rarely happens. Suddenly, it is usually the result of a series of seemingly minor decisions that accumulate over time. This understanding should make us more vigilant about the small choices we make every day. The decision to harbor resentment rather than forgive, to pursue personal advantage at others' expense, to rationalize behavior we know is wrong, to prioritize our desires over divine commands. These seemingly minor choices shape our character and determine our ultimate destiny just as surely as more dramatic moral decisions. The fourth lesson concerns the ultimate futility of rebellion against divine authority. Despite his tremendous power, intelligence, and determination, rebellion was doomed from the beginning. He cannot create, only corrupt. He cannot heal, only harm. He cannot build, only destroy. His apparent victories are always temporary, while his ultimate defeat is certain. This truth offers both warning and comfort. It warns us against the folly of thinking we can successfully oppose divine will, that we can find happiness and fulfillment by rejecting God's authority over our lives. But it also comforts us with the assurance that evil, no matter how powerful it appears, is ultimately self-defeating and temporary. The fifth lesson highlights the importance of humility and gratitude. Satan's fall began when he forgot that all his gifts came from God, when he began to see his abilities as self-generated rather than received. His example teaches us to maintain constant awareness of our dependence on divine grace, to recognize that everything we have and are comes from sources beyond ourselves. In practical terms, this means cultivating habits of gratitude, acknowledging our limitations, seeking guidance from sources wiser than ourselves, and remembering that our successes are never entirely self-made. Pride tells us we are self-sufficient. Humility reminds us we are created beings dependent on our Creator for everything from our next breath to our eternal destiny. The sixth lesson addresses the reality and danger of spiritual warfare. Satan's story is not ancient mythology, but present reality. The same being who tempted Eve in Eden continues to work against human flourishing today. His methods remain the same: deception rather than force, corruption rather than destruction, the perversion of good things rather than the introduction of obviously evil ones. Understanding this reality doesn't require us to see demons behind every difficulty or Satan in every setback, but it does require us to recognize that we face a real spiritual adversary whose intelligence far exceeds our own, whose experience spans millennia, and whose primary weapon is deception. We must be vigilant, discerning, and dependent on divine strength rather than our own resources. The seventh and final lesson is perhaps the most important. Despite Satan's power and malevolence, divine love and justice will ultimately prevail. Satan's story is not one of successful rebellion, but of defeated opposition. His temporary victories serve only to highlight the greater victory that God has already accomplished, and will ultimately reveal. This truth provides hope in the darkest circumstances, strength in the most difficult trials, and confidence in the ultimate meaning and purpose of existence. No matter how powerful evil appears, no matter how successful deception becomes, no matter how long justice seems delayed, the outcome is certain. Light will overcome darkness, truth will overcome lies, love will overcome hatred, and good will overcome evil. As we reflect on the complete arc of Satan's story from perfect creation to prideful rebellion, from cosmic warfare to ultimate defeat, we see reflected the fundamental choice that faces every conscious being. Will we choose humility or pride, service or self-exaltation, divine authority or personal autonomy? The choice is ours, but the consequences are eternal. Satan's example shows us where one path leads. The promise of redemption through Christ shows us where the other leads. The wisdom to choose correctly comes from understanding both destinations clearly and choosing the one that leads to life rather than death, to fellowship with God rather than eternal separation from Him. In the end, Satan's story serves not to glorify evil but to magnify good, not to celebrate rebellion but to vindicate divine authority, not to promote despair but to offer hope. Even the worst tragedy in cosmic history becomes, in God's hands, a means of revealing His glory and accomplishing His purposes. The morning star fell from heaven and became the prince of darkness. But his fall only serves to highlight the greater glory of the one who never fell, who came down from heaven not in defeat but in victory, not to rebel but to redeem, not to destroy but to restore. In the end, it is not Satan's story that defines the cosmic narrative, but God's end. That story, unlike Satan's, ends not in eternal punishment but in eternal joy for all who choose light over darkness, truth over lies, and divine love over selfish pride. Thank you for joining me on this profound journey through one of Scripture's most complex and sobering accounts. The story of Lucifer's fall from the heights of heaven to the depths of damnation serves as both warning and promise, warning of where pride and rebellion lead, and promise that divine justice and love will ultimately triumph over all opposition. I want to hear from you, our incredible Sigil Sanctum community. Which aspects of Satan's story challenged your thinking the most? What lessons from his fall resonate most powerfully with your own spiritual journey? Do you see parallels between his temptations and the choices we face in our daily lives? Share your insights, questions, and reflections in the comments below. Your perspectives often illuminate aspects of these ancient truths that I might have missed. If this deep exploration has expanded your understanding of the cosmic battle between good and evil, please give this video a thumbs up. Your support through likes, comments, and shares truly makes a difference in helping us reach other seekers of truth who hunger for these profound insights. Don't forget to subscribe to Sigil Sanctum and ring that notification bell, because we're just getting started on our journey through the mysteries of ancient wisdom and spiritual truth. Next week, we'll be exploring the fascinating figure of the Archangel Michael the Warrior, who defeated Lucifer and continues to serve as heaven's champion against the forces of darkness. You won't want to miss that epic investigation. Remember, in a world filled with deception and spiritual warfare, knowledge is your greatest defense, and truth is your most powerful weapon. Stay vigilant, stay humble, and never forget that no matter how dark the night becomes, the dawn is always coming. Until next time, may your path be illuminated by divine wisdom, and may you always choose the light over the darkness. This is Sigil Sanctum, signing off. Keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep growing in truth.